As we continue to immerse ourselves in the intriguing world of artificial intelligence at the Sogody Winter Summit 2023, it is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker and my dear friend, Chris Fitkin. Chris is a luminary in the field of engineering efficiency, not just a full stack software engineer leader, architect, and developer, but also a founding member of Round. With a career spanning more than 20 years, his deep expertise, innovative approach in software architecture are more than welcome to guide us moving into the post-AI development era. Today, Chris joins us to share his insights on a topic that sits at the very heart of modern software engineering, utilizing GPT for building an API service wrapper with typing support and IDE integration. This subject is particularly timely and relevant as it dives into the practical applications of GPT technologies in enhancing software development practices. Whether you're a developer, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about the future of AI in software engineering, Chris' keynote is poised to offer valuable perspective and innovative strategies. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Chris Fitkin. Welcome, Chris.
Oh, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Very excited to be here today. I was really excited when I got invited to join this call. This is a topic that I love using, I love talking about, and I love sharing with other developers. And so unless there's any questions or feedback right away, I've got some slides I can put up and jump right into this fun keynote and demo. Everyone ready?
Ready? Yeah.
All right.
Also, we thank you, Chris. I know it's very early. Hopefully this wasn't a hassle with the kids and everything. But yeah,
perfect time. Kids are gone. They're at school. It's early morning in California over here.
That's great. That's great. Can't wait to see the demo.
All right. Is this up on the screen? Perfect.
Yes.
So today we're talking about improving developer efficiency with AI and ChatGPT. And specifically, we're going to look at a demo where live on screen using GPT, I'm going to be building an API service wrapper with typing support using IDE integration. Like I said, I've been developing software and building software teams for 20 years. And one of the things I've consistently seen over those decades is every team and every company wants people to build more, better, faster. And, you can only get so much out of developers every single day. And that's why the advances with GPT for development have been so exciting in the last year, because it's probably the biggest change in developer efficiency and productivity tools that I've seen in that entire time period. When I first started using this, it honestly felt like magic to me. If you haven't been using ChatGPT in your day-to-day development processes, it's something I think you should start experimenting with. Me and my team use it a lot every single day, all day long. And hopefully after this demo today, you're going to have some ideas of how you can introduce it or new areas of your development process that you're able to introduce it into. Why is this important? Why is this important to talk about right now? I pulled these 3 quotes from news articles this week. Dice.com tells us you're going to need to do this if you're looking for work. It's going to give you an advantage right now to be able to talk about and put on your resume if you're applying for work or looking for work. Soon it's going to be a requirement. You're going to have to know how to do it to work at some places. Recent survey from GBH in London says that 78% of companies are expecting to use AI for their software development. And if you want to work at one of those 3/4 of the companies in the world or work with them, you're going to be expected to be able to work that way. One, it's already more effective, right? 70% of Copilot users today say that they're more productive and their work quality is improved based on Microsoft's internal reporting. And if you believe Amplitude's CTO, this is fundamentally going to change the way that we write code as software developers. Instead of doing a lot of hand coding all day long, you're going to have to learn how to work with and be good at managing prompts or writing prompts for code development. And that's what we're going to see a lot of today inside of our demo. All right, how can you use, or what different areas of your developer's workflow are you able to use AI and ChatGPT? Good news is everywhere. when you're planning, when you're researching, when you're designing, when you're writing code, refactoring, fixing code, changing code, abstracting code, when you're debugging, fixing errors, when you're writing tests or testing your code, when you're writing documentation, and when you're looking at code from other people, managing and approving pull requests or doing code reviews. Just about everywhere. And today we're going to look at a lot of that. In less than 30 minutes, we're going to hit on 5 of those different parts of the development workflow and see how GPT integrates into it. So how can you write code with ChatGPT if you haven't already? There's 3 ways and they get really easy. The first thing, the easiest thing to do is just use ChatGPT. Open up chat.openai.com, ask it to write something, copy and paste the code directly into your code base or IDE. If you want to get a little bit better, a little more complicated, next level would be using an IDE plugin. Most popular are Microsoft Copilot and AWS Code Whisperer. I use both of those every day. And it's like a really smart IntelliSense autocomplete, but instead of finishing words, it can write whole lines for you. It can write whole blocks of code for you. And it learns based off of what you've been writing and other files inside of your IDE. So it not just writes code, but it writes code like you do. And my favorite way to write code with ChatGPT is a fully integrated AI-first code editors like cursor.so, which is designed to make AI part of the development process easier, more frequently. And guess which one we're going to be looking at today? That's right. We're going to be writing code with Cursor and Cursor's AI integrated IDE. In our demo today, we're going to watch as I build it, like I said, build an API service wrapper with typing support inside that IDE. And I want to talk about why we chose this as an example, or why I'm doing this as an example. One, this is something that we have to do frequently as software developers. We're always working with integrating different systems together. And a lot of them might have good documentation, middling documentation, but a lot don't have SDKs. You know, when you're working with real common libraries like with Google or like with Stripe, you can just pull their JavaScript or the Python SDK. But a lot of different services and third parties that you have to work with just give you some docs that might be pretty well documented, a little bit, maybe not great, don't have examples inside the language that you like to use, might have a curl request example, but you might have to do some translating on that. And so we don't always have these as available examples. And that's something that ChatGPT is great at, taking an example from one language or one format and turning it into another. And it's also going to be reducing boilerplate, right? Anytime you find yourself doing something over and over inside your code base or repeat it as a developer, right? You want to figure out how to eliminate that repetition. ChatGPT is great at reducing boilerplate work and generating a lot of standard code. And we're going to see that today also. All right, on to the specific example. We're going to be using an API with a platform called Spreedly. If you haven't used Spreedly or heard of it before, it is a payment orchestration platform. It's a service that lets you interact with customer payments, secure data, payment destinations without having to store or work with a lot of secure PCI compliant data inside your systems. We're outsourcing the security and the complications around with that, but we need to be able to learn how to work with that API. And we're going to focus on 2 methods or 2 endpoints at that API. One is a create endpoint to create a Google Pay, a secure Google Pay payment token. And 2 is a deliver endpoint where we're going to take that token data and we're going to be able to send it to some arbitrary recipient. We're looking at a demo today, but in the real world, you might send that to your on-site point of sale system, you might send it to a billing department, or you might send it to a payment processor that needs to handle that payment token and payment data for you. All right, so to our demo, we're gonna jump out of these slides, and hopefully what we're gonna see in the next 30 minutes is me generating 8 hours worth of productivity in 30 minutes without writing a single line of code by hand, all using ChatGPT. Everyone ready?
Ready?
Yes.
Love it.
I actually haven't used Cursor before, so I'm very excited to see how that works.
right, let's get this whole window over here. All right. First thing I want to do is just show you the API that we're working with. What I mean, why I picked this as an example. One, there's a lot of different functions inside here. This is a API documentation for that orchestration provider I told you about, Spreedly. The functions that we care about is create a Google Pay payment. When I look at this, some things that stand out to me is their formatting for this documentation. Again, non-standard. I've got tables that I've got to read data out of. It's not provided in a way that I can consume it like a Swagger file or GraphQL reflection. It's representing nested objects as these double Unicode right chevrons, right? That's non-standard. When I look at the URL parameters, it's giving me a list of URL parameters. When I look at the example, it's not actually a parameter. They want me to add the format as an extension here. It's given me some examples of a JSON body, but the example isn't a complete call request. It doesn't include all the fields that I want to be able to send and receive back. And so this is some good documentation, but it's definitely not the best documentation. It's not standard. And it's not really complete or as complete as I would like. And it's definitely not something that I can automatically consume like a Swagger or an OpenAPI spec file. Just so you can see it, the other endpoint we're going to be looking at today is this deliver endpoint, which lets us take that token that we generated right here and send it to our recipient. All right. Let's look at our IDE. This is a blank IDE. If it looks familiar to you, Cursor is a thinly disguised wrapper on, oh, there it is. Can we see it?
Awesome.
If this looks familiar, Cursor is a thinly disguised wrapper on top of VS Code, just with some really cool integrations already automatically built into it. So if you've used VS Code, this should look familiar. And there we go. The first thing we're going to do today is I just want to introduce the IDE to you. So if I pull up a file like my package.json, I've got 3 different things that I can do to interact with ChatGPT from this IDE. I'm going to be able to use it to 1, chat, 2, edit code, and 3, read documentation. So what that looks like is if I want to just interact with ChatGPT, right? I can pull up this chat window on the side. You can see I get to pick which version of GPT I want to work with, and I can ask it anything about my code base or the file that I have open right now. So I could ask it, what is this package.json file say? I've never read one before. So you'll get standard GPT response. It's a core file in Node projects, but specifically, it's going to tell me about this file because it has the context of the file I'm working on. And so while it describes what dependencies are, it says in your project, you've got jest dependency, which is type definitions for jest. And it's also got your other dependencies, Node.js Winston, and it tells me that Winston is a popular logging library. So if I had just pulled this project up, asked this question, I can say, oh, this might be a project about logging, or if I wanted to understand what those dependencies are without having to go and look up every single one, this can do it for me in line. Chatting with your documents like GPT, really cool. All right, the other thing you can do with Cursor is edit files inline or code while you're working on that. The way to do that, highlight it, I get this little edit button here, and I can ask it to do things like add a description, increment the version, and add an Axios dependency, right? 3 different things at once. Well, I got a patch update, but it goes line by line, and it added all this information for me. So this is really cool. incremented a patch. It says that this is a package for handling transactions with the Spreedly API. This is something that I didn't instruct it to do, but digging through a lot of my files from doing this earlier, it found information about the Spreedly API, and it was able to determine that what this is about. And it gave me an Axios version in my dependency. Super cool. All right. The third thing that we want to be able to do is not just interact with the files inside of our code base, but also interact with files and websites and documentation outside of our code. And the way to do that is adding context for documentation, and I can click add new document, and I could type in something like this path here, Spreedly reference API v1. And let's say, just give it a name so I could find it. Confirm. Over here, you get this little wheel. It's learning the Spreedly API v1 reference. And so it's going to download that documentation, any nested pages inside there based on the path and links, and pull them in. So when I ask it to do something, it's going to have all the knowledge of that documentation page that we were just looking at, as well as the code inside of my code base. All right, really cool. Any questions so far? I could take a quick stop. Otherwise, we're rolling through and we're going to start writing some code.
Well, I wish I had been using Cursor when we were building TweetPeak. That's is this how long has this been available?
I've been using this for about 2 months now.
2 months. All right. It's the way that you just pulled in the docs. I mean, that would have saved me, and I think all of us, a lot of time. I just have one question. So,
yeah.
Apart from pulling the docs, how do you think this is different from GitHub Copilot? Like, I know that the thing with Copilot is that we don't know how it gets its context. So, do you see any difference between these two? Any pros and cons?
When I use Copilot, I find that it tries to do more predictive automation and recommended completions versus working with Cursor. I'm using it a lot more intentionally, giving it instruction and asking it what to do.
So in the sense that with Copilot, you have to delete way more code that is predicted compared to Cursor.
Yeah, I get a little bit of that, and I like the control that I have of working with Cursor. It's also obviously a different tune model. Copilot's tuned for development, but I find that the native ChatGPT 4 is already really good at writing code when you give it good prompts and instructions. And so maybe I'm getting a little bit better at writing prompts, or maybe ChatGPT is just getting better and I'm staying the same. Either way, it's working.
Yeah, but you use GPT-4, right?
Yes, I'm sorry?
Have you tried GPT 3.5? Is that something, in terms of cost, it's more feasible, but is it really helpful?
It is absolutely helpful. I found that especially with packages that have a long history of documentation on the internet, like if I'm interacting with some Google API or the Twitter API that's been consumed a lot and it's been very popular, 3.5 is better at that. If I'm trying to work with something that I'm feeding it the documentation in real time, GPT-4 has been better for me.
Well, that's awesome. Does anyone else have any questions? I think we can just dive into coding.
Yeah, we are. All right. I'm going to start with an empty file for my Spreedly service.ts. All right. And so rather than write any code myself, I'm going to ask GPT using that demo documentation that we pulled in, write a Spreedly service API wrapper that implements methods for payment methods dot create Google Pay and deliver Spreedly endpoints for delivering payment tokens to a receiver. All right, let's see what we get.
This is a very technical prompt. Like, you have to know what you're asking for very accurately. How, if you didn't know anything about the Spreedly API, is there a way to shortcut this? Do you ask the in the chat panel what possibilities there are and what you're trying to achieve, and then go to this prompt?
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew those two endpoints that I wanted to include. Let me talk through this real quick. It created a constructor for me, my Spreedly service class. It pulled in that Axios dependency and created two endpoints for me. So it read my documentation. It found what path I need to pull from, and it figured out what properties or what values I want to be able to pass into those, and create these little wrappers for those endpoints. But great question. If I don't know which endpoints I want, right, I could pull up my chat browser and I could say again, using the documentation, right, I want to write a wrapper class for capturing Apple Pay payments from my users and collecting the money. What endpoints do I need to use? All right, so we're doing this live. I've never tried it. It's going to look at my current file, right? Good demos, right? So GPT makes for a fun demo because it's non-deterministic, and every time I do this, it's a little bit different. Cool. So if I hadn't read that documentation, right, it tells me after it's reading it, it recommends that I work with these two endpoints. One, the create Apple Pay payment method at post payment methods using the Apple Pay object, right? Cool, smart. And this purchase method at gateway token purchase, where I can take the payment method token that I generated from Apple Pay and run that token through this gateway purchase endpoint. And as long as I've got a good gateway token or a gateway entity that I've created, it will be able to capture that payment. So I could then take this and say, let's move these into my service wrapper. We're going to not do that yet, but we're going to come back and look at that again a little bit later. After I've done this, it looks really good. What am I missing? I've got a couple errors here. What does it tell me? It says property client doesn't exist on the Spreedly service. I don't know how to fix that. I've never written TypeScript before. AI, tell me what to do. All right, this is happening because I'm using this .client, but TypeScript doesn't know what that's supposed to be. So, hey, look at this. It says all we got to do is add this private declaration at the top of my class. I've got to import the Axios instance type from Axios, right? It read that from my node modules, and all of a sudden my error goes away. It's typed really nicely, and if I'm trying to work with this client object inside of here, I can say this .client .post, and I get all the cool autocomplete and typing information that I expect because it knows what I'm pulling from now. So this was one more thing I want to show you before we get into some typing is ChatGPT is also really good at refactoring. And let's say, I know I told it to use the Axios library, but I want to try to remove dependencies from my project, and I know I can do this work just with Node. So I can take all of this and I could say, let's refactor to remove the Axios dependency and replace it with core node functionality. It pulls in the request method from the node's HTTPS library. Thinking.
This visual editing is really cool. When you see, yeah.
Yeah. And so what has it done? So rather than keeping a client as an object here, I've just got options for sending an HTTP request, and so that they're consistent across all of my calls. It's removed Axios, and it's rewritten this to do some of the JSON parsing and promise management that I have to do with the HTTPS library that normally you would get for free from Axios. And so let's refactor this one more time. Let's be better developers. And I see some repetitive code. I'm pulling in requests. I'm doing stringify in both of these functions. I don't want to do this everywhere. So highlight, edit, edit freely. And let's abstract our HTTP request to a shared method inside this class with error handling and JSON parsing. So all that code that was doing the JSON marshalling and parsing and stringifying is now inside this single shared function. Let's accept that. And my endpoints for create Google Pay and deliver payment are now little thin wrappers that are just managing the properties that I need and the endpoint path that I need. This looks really good. It's starting to look like a really nice service wrapper. I'm happy with it. All right. So we've created our service wrapper. We've learned about our documentation. We've done some refactoring and some abstractions. And now let's say I want to improve this service library or service wrapper, and I want to add some type support. Everybody big TypeScript typing fans out there?
Oh no, don't open this can of worms, man. But yeah,
Good.
we're split here. TypeScript and JavaScript, pretty much the same battle, which is running on Twitter as well.
Yeah, I'm a huge TypeScript proponent. There's definitely a learning curve, though, right? And if you don't know how to write good types, it makes your development slow. It makes it clunky. And if you write bad types, it might be better than writing no types at all because you end up writing a lot of like any's, you work around it, you end up with a lot of red squiggly lines and errors that you shouldn't need that you then have to go fix your types on. But using ChatGPT is a great way to learn better typing. And we're going to see how that works right now. Let me pull up my typing prompts and let's look at our Google Pay method here. And there's no types on there, even though it's a TypeScript file. So let's change that. And let's clear my history. And using one thing, I'm going to take a shortcut here. So this is a big file, and I wanted to only look at this information right here. So I'm just going to copy this out rather than ask it to go through this entire website, because I know it's going to be more specific when I feed it a smaller set of instructions. And I'm going to say, write TypeScript types for the input and response of my create Google Pay method using these specs and include all properties and nested properties. All right, that looks like a good prompt. Paste all that in, and let's see how it does. All right. This is looking good. I've got my Google Pay payments data. I've got the payment method, which is the wrapper. I've got an interface for the input, and I've got a interface for the response type here. First thing I'm going to do is take all this and just stick it inside of a type file. And yes, paste that in there. And then it tells me how to apply this to my function. Take that and replace that here. Now I've got good. Ooh. Not assignable to type. All right, we've got a bug in line. Right? Real time. Let's see what's going on. I've got transaction declared in 2 places. Let's fix that. You know what? I disagree with that. Let's see why it doesn't like this. Unknown. Ah, all right. So I told it, let's look at this here. I told it I'm going to be returning this create Google Pay promise, but it doesn't know that my HTTP request is already going to do that, right? So what can I do in TypeScript to help test for that? I can say, write a type guard statement to ensure the response from HTTP request meets the format expectations of free Google Pay response. And assert the type. All right, I got a couple new private methods. Is a payment method response and is a create Google Pay payment method response. I've got my response loaded in here and I do some typings and I've got error handling if I'm getting bad data back from my API. I now have a type safe response from my method and I'm actually doing the work in real time of checking that with a guard statement to make sure that it's working. So this is some good typing. I'm happy with it. The only thing I would add here is this payment data that I'm sticking in here. As a developer, if I'm coming back to this, I don't really know what all the fields are. I might want to be more verbose just so I can see everything that's getting passed in there. And let's refactor again. Let's say expand the payment data object on the input parameters to show all the possible fields that are being loaded in the Google Pay payment data format. Beautiful, nice long line there. Let's see if I can format that a little nicer. Perfect. All right. Now this is a beautiful method that I'm happy with. I can see all the fields that it's expecting. I'm destructuring in line. I can see the types for each of those properties that I need, and I know the kind of response that I'm going to be getting from it. All right, so we've written our service wrapper, we've refactored it, we've added typing support. What can I do to make this service wrapper, this project better? I know, I'm gonna write unit tests. Show of hands, who writes unit tests? I'm looking, I don't see enough hands in that audience. That's what I thought. All right. Yeah, everybody knows unit tests are important. A lot of times you might save that until later on if you're not doing test-driven development. You might skimp out, not write enough unit tests, or you might just save it till later, or it ends up, as tech debt that never gets completed. With ChatGPT, writing unit tests is super fun and easy. All right, let's make a test file. Let's call it freely service.test.typescript. And if you want to take a guess what we're going to do, we're just going to ask ChatGPT to write it for us. So write unit tests for our API service wrapper in freely service.ts. I can just type @ in the file name to pull in the context of a different file into this one. With no more instruction than that, writing my unit test, let's write it. In line, we're describing the Spreedly service. Before each test, we're going to instantiate the service, load some mock data. It should have the ability to create Google Pay, and it should throw an error for invalid response format. Love that. All right. This is a good start to our test file. It's more than if I hadn't written any tests.
Yeah.
Right. I've got to go over here. I got to export this. I promise this is the only time I'm actually going to write a line of code. And in here, so that's importing now. I actually don't need that. I'm going to delete those. It should pull that automatically. What kind of errors am I getting here? Let's fix those. So if I load this, it says, I'm missing some property values. Quick fix it with AI. All right, fix that format because it knows that I'm using this, right? Later passing it into Google Pay and it wasn't meeting the TypeScript requirements. Probably the same thing here inside this mock response. Quick fix with AI.
So basically, because we added TypeScript ensures that our fields are as close to documentation as possible. And now the test cases make sure that they have those fields because TypeScript requires it. That's a huge workaround to not have to pass in the documentation for doing tests. That's amazing. I will start doing tests now, Chris.
Good, thank you. All right. It's being lazy, and it's like, hey, just add the 727. We're gonna ignore that, and we're gonna give it a big as any, just so I don't have to write that right now. But right, I should go through the work of pulling those out of the documentation and on here. We're just gonna save a little bit of time right now. All right, so I've got 2 tests. I know it's gonna create a Google Pay. As a good test writer, I should be writing some negative test cases. So I might go here and say, let's add negative test cases for the create Google Pay method that tests for malformed or missing data and empty requests that expect errors to be thrown. Look at these. Look at all these negative test cases now. I'm going to add any in here just so that, right, TypeScript wasn't letting me test bad data because it's really good at what it does. But I'm going to run it anyway, and I'm going to expect it to reject that data and throw an exception here. Now I've got some great testing. Let's just add one more test. Add a case to ensure that our service is instantiated and of the right type. Cool. All right. So I know that the service that I've instantiated is an instance. It's the instance of the class that I want. I know that the functions I wrote are working. I know if I pass bad data or no data into this. And now in a couple minutes, I've written some really good tests for this. So I wrote a service wrapper. I abstracted some of the data. I refactored it. I added TypeScript support, and I wrote test cases. We've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to do two more things. I'm going to expand our service wrapper with a bunch more fields and properties, and I'm going to write some documentation. So let's pull up our service wrapper again. Let's go to the end, and just because I already know some of the payment methods on there, I can do things like add methods for create credit card, create Apple Pay, list payments, and show payments. And it's going to use all the instructions that I gave it earlier about how to write my methods, how to do my typings, and it's going to follow that same format that it learned working with me earlier in this file to make sure that all of these are well written, include all good types, include all the properties that I want to pass into it. And I'll accept that. You see my red squiggly line, right? These are new methods that it wants me to write. These are new types that it wants to write. We could go through that same process before to create those. We're not going to do that today because we already know how to do it and we're great at it. Last thing we want to do is write some documentation. readme.md. All right. Let's say using context from our service file and our test file here, right? README documentation for this project that includes a bulleted list of all available service methods as well as a usage example. All right, let's see if it can figure out what we wrote today. Spreedly service. The service provides methods to interact with the Spreedly API. Here's a list of available methods. HTTP request, create Google Pay, deliver payment token, create credit card, create Apple Pay, all the methods that we wrote with instructions or with a quick description of what each of those do. It stopped here. This is a limitation of ChatGPT. It can only write so much at once. So when I'm writing whole files, it might only get halfway done, but I could say things like, finish this documentation. No more instructions needed. It knows that we're writing example or that it's supposed to. A little JavaScript code block here with examples on how to create a Google Pay payment method, how to create a credit card payment method, how to list all of my payment methods, and or pull a specific one. Love that. Here's some good documentation. This is better documentation than most of my projects and PRs get checked in with, but not anymore because now I write famous and quick documentation using ChatGPT. All right. What do we do today? We read API documentation in 30 minutes. We scaffolded a service wrapper. We refactored it for abstraction. We added strong typing support. We added unit test coverage. We added service functionality to that service wrapper. And we wrote documentation. Hopefully that delivered on my promise for 8 hours worth of productivity in 30 minutes without writing a line of code with ChatGPT. And I hope that your takeaway from this call today is if you're not using AI in your day-to-day development process, that you're excited about it and you want to start doing it. And if you have been using a little bit, then you want to experiment and find some more ways to do it that you haven't yet. Thank you all very much for your time today. My name's Chris.
Absolutely, Chris.
And if you want to get in touch with me, LinkedIn, Twitter, just use my name. It's super easy. I'd love to hear from any or all of you after this call today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Do we have time for a couple of questions?
I'm here. Yeah, absolutely. It's 8 a.m. I got a lot of time today.
All right, and I think most of us have already followed you either on purpose or through TweetPeak, so so that's the thing. So I just have one question. I get this from time to time when we're trying to use any AI solution to increase my productivity. Is there a case where trying to do this with ChatGPT or any of the other LLMs, actually you end up with wasting time more than saving it? Because sometimes I'm like, I've been going back and forth with GPT-4, and then I'm like, I'll just do it myself. Does that happen to you, and how do you tackle that?
Writing code with ChatGPT, like everything else we do, is a skill, right? When I was learning how to write JavaScript, I wrote a lot of bad JavaScript that needed to get refactored and fixed. If you start using ChatGPT consistently integrated into your workflow, you're going to do two things. One, you're going to get better at using it, right? Prompt engineering, people joke about it. It absolutely is a skill. Being able to know the nuance of how to ask for specific things. Like today, I would ask for, what's a great example? When I was originally testing these scripts and I said, I wanted a deliver method on this class. Deliver is a generic term. And the first time I asked for it, ChatGPT was like, here's a little wrapper around your HTTP request. And I called it deliver. And I had to go back and say, no, deliver is a specific function in this API documentation that is used to send tokens to payment recipients. Go back and try again. And so the next time I knew that if I use generic terms like deliver, it's going to need a little more context, right? And so I'm becoming a better prompt writer as I need to write prompts for code development. So short answer, no. My coding is always more efficient and productive when I'm using ChatGPT, at least first, at least in the scaffolding, and usually in the refactoring also, and it's because I practice it, like any good developer.
That's awesome. And I think one thing that we can also learn as a side benefit to this demo is how you prompt. I've seen a couple of people who are as specific as you when prompting. So I think that's the best takeaway for me as well, because I think we're getting lazy when we prompt. We're like, we expect for ChatGPT to just know what we're thinking. And then I don't even correct my typos. And I saw that you went back and you corrected them. You were very meticulous. No, it's not response, it's response, like every time. So yeah, that's a great takeaway as well. But yeah, I guess as engineers, it comes close to hard. And I'll also start using Cursor now. You sold me, man. Is that your product?
No. Somebody else I found on Twitter, I probably auto-followed him with TweetPeaks, and he just ended up in my feed.
What a full circle. I wish it was your product. I'd ask for a discount or something, but I'll just try the other guy. All right, Chris, thank you. Appreciate your time. The team will get back to you with additionals. It was an absolute joy.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.